This episode is brought to you by Merge Marketing for all of your needs on print, design, web page design, and security. Go to mergemarketinginc.com.
Yo, 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 hello, hello, hello. I am your host, Tony, Supertone, aka. Welcome to SubmergeLife.com. Go to SubmergeLife.com. Look at all the episodes. I'm so glad that you guys are here. I have a very, 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 very special guest. Of course, I tell that to every one of my guests because they are all special. But this one is really special. Ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Mr. Aaron Arnett.
Hello, sir.
Let
How
me
are
fix
you?
this. Okay, good. We're good. Good, man. How are you?
Good. Hanging in there, living the dream. Or to go Dave Ramsey, better than I deserve. Uh, good. I
Let me
forgot that you
fix a
called
little
yourself.
of this background. Oh, you forgot I called myself Supertown?
Yeah, and then it made me think. Like, I've never seen you take on. Like, is there a part where you ever take off the glasses and the hat or something, and you become unrecognizable to people? Like, does that happen with you, or is
Yeah,
it
when I go
just
to
kind
bed.
of? Oh, so that's where you become supertone.
I guess
Okay.
so.
Okay.
I become
Okay.
super
Well, that
sleepy
adds
and go to bed.
that adds a new twist to the supertone. But yes, thank you for having me. It has been quite a long time. Not
It
only
has. It's been a long
personally,
journey for you and
hmm
everything.
yeah, it has. But I'm glad to be here.
All right. So I do need to switch up everything. And I did this intentionally because everybody's used to seeing the shoes. And I wanted to highlight one photo because there is a photo that kind of brings us together where we kind of met. And that is this photo. Do you remember that city?
I do. That is El Gorrion, or which I later learned in English means the sparrow. And that is a city right below where we used to, or it's where we worked in Guatemala.
Yeah. And for those that don't know, they are about to find out. We met each other um, because we were going on a 2 week mission trip with a local church here in town. And this is the one of the cities that we worked in. Right? So if you are just listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, go to the YouTube. Go to the YouTube. You can see the photo. So I'm gonna put that back there so that we can see that, and then let's look at some of our younger self, shall we?
Yeah.
Look at
Uh,
that! Oh my gosh, that's when we were 12.
Let's see, how long ago was that? So it's 2024 right now. That was 8 years ago. Can you believe that was 8 years ago? And for those of you just listening, what we are looking at is five young gentlemen plus Tony, and we are all sweaty. We are tired. We are standing in front of, I would say, you call that a mint chocolate chip colored wall, and I don't know why, but they put the biggest person in the front and the middle, and that is me. And this was in a phase when I was letting my beard go. My beard was going crazy, but I didn't believe in myself when it came to my mustache. And so I had no mustache. And this was literally when I'll get into this later, but when we got back on this trip was when I started dating my now wife. And she was like, "Love the beard. Where's the mustache?" And I said, I don't think I can grow a mustache. But if you're watching this on the video on YouTube or wherever, you can see, yes, in fact, the mustache did come in. And of this photo, that's two regrets: standing in the middle, and secondly, not having a mustache and just going full Amish.
Man, I love this photo. It brings back so many memories. You said 8 years, dude. It feels like 20 years. 20 years ago. That's what
It
this feels
does.
like.
Yeah. It feels like another life.
We have lost time.
Hmm.
Yeah, we were just talking about that. It feels like another life. I've forgotten that we had done this. Have I really forgotten? Not really. Because, we went through some stuff in this one. This one was fun. You went
Yeah,
through
we
some
did.
stuff, right? In this trip?
I did. So I just like to say before we get any further into this, I don't know if any other guest on your show has ever done this to you, and any other guest wouldn't give you this courtesy, but I am going to give you this courtesy by saying you didn't ask me your 2 questions. So if you want me to get into it, I will run right into it. But you haven't asked me your 2 questions that you always ask at the beginning of the podcast. Now you're new to the podcast.
You're right.
Is Tony,
you're right.
and every episode he asks his guests 2 questions. The first of which I hope I'm about to answer. This is the first question. Actually, is the one that I have been dreading answering the most. But here I am, and I'm not trying to take over or anything. I'm just saying
Right.
I want to be courteous to the format. And then we'll get into all that.
You are so right. I'll be honest, it's been a while since I've recorded an episode.
I get it. I get it.
Welcome to Submerge Life. We ask 2 questions and 2 questions only. Not really. I ask a lot of questions, but the 2 main questions is how are you submerging into life and what's the journey that brought you here? So Arron, let's begin with how are you submerging in life today?
Okay, now this, like I said, this is the one that I have been dreading the most because I feel like when you ask a question, how are you submerging to life? I feel like I should be the one to say, I am plunging into the pool and I'm doing this and that. I feel like life has submerged me at this point. And, we'll get into the story of Guatemala and all that, but I feel like since then it's just been a whirlwind of what the heck, like, what am I supposed to be doing? What are we doing, God? Like, I'm here. What are we supposed to do? Immediately since coming back from Guatemala, our first son was born. Then we went across country. We're back, and now we have a second. And to me, how am I submerging life? I'm trying to be the best dad that I can, and that has been the biggest joy in the midst of kind of honestly chaos at the moment. But that's what I'm trying to do: be the biggest dad, or not. I mean, I am a big, but be the best dad that I can be, and just trying to, as much as I can, which is very difficult, just stay joyful amidst, a 2-year-old who has discovered his screaming voice. And it's funny, once you get a toddler who screams, the baby crying like almost is like a soothing sound machine. It's really weird. But that's where I am right now. That's how I think. I mean, if that's how I'm submerging into life.
Yeah, no, I think that was a beautiful comment because no matter what we're going through, no matter how much chaos there is, we need to find that thing to submerge into life with. And for you, it's being the best dad that you can. And that is amazing. Like, keep doing that. At the very least, do that.
Yeah.
So anyhow,
Well,
all right, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. We met in Guatemala. Well, before Guatemala, we were going on a 2-week mission trip, and we didn't know what to expect. I didn't know what to expect. This was my second mission trip. Okay, maybe I did know a little bit of what to expect. My first mission trip was in Thailand, in the middle of nowhere. So that prepared me for Guatemala, which we were still in the middle of nowhere. But was this your first one?
Yeah. So before this happened, I had zero idea where Guatemala was in the world, other than I knew it was south of the border. Other than that, I had no idea. I had no idea what it was. I didn't think of Guatemala. I probably had only heard the name of Guatemala a couple times before this when something had appeared in the news, but was not on my radar whatsoever. And what happened is my younger sister, we're almost 8 years apart. She had signed up to go on the trip. And, she signs up and it's like, wow, okay, good. That's a big step. But she had pretty much just graduated high school the year before. So this was like a big deal for her. She's getting out in the world, going to go to Guatemala. And I'm like, hey, have fun. That sounds great. And then she says, well, why don't you go too? And like I said, not on my radar whatsoever. Being a missionary, not on my radar whatsoever. But I said, you know what? I'll pray about it. It's only a 2-week trip. Not that big of a deal. I'll pray about it. This was in the summer when she had asked me, I believe. Mm-hmm. And I prayed about it until November, December, when the deadline had come up to sign up. And at the end of that, I felt like there was no reason to not go. So I said,
Hmm.
hey, whatever. Like, I'm not, what am I going to miss out working at Kmart for 2 weeks? Like, I guess I wasn't working at Kmart anymore by that point, but I was like, what am I going to miss out on by going on this trip? And so I said, sure, let's go. And I didn't realize that going on that trip would pretty much change the entire course of the rest of my life.
Okay, I know it's coming after that, but let's just talk about our little mission trip and the things that we
Yeah.
experienced there. You experienced some stuff there. Didn't you have a little dental problem there?
Yeah. So when it started looking back, it started on the plane ride down. I mean,
Uh,
it had to have started before then, to be honest, but I noticed it
mhm.
on the plane ride down, chewing a piece of gum, and just something felt kind of off with my tooth. And I was like, it didn't hurt, but it just kind of was like, that's kind of weird. And then within the next couple days of being there, it turned from that was kind of weird to this hurts to this is debilitating, or is that the right word? Pain, to where like I can't even focus on doing whatever I need to do because this hurts so much, and I'm popping so many ibuprofens
Mhm.
that it's not really taking away the pain. So it's like I didn't want to say anything. I didn't want to raise a stink. They had a medical clinic at
Mhm.
the office that we were working at, and it's like, am I really gonna bother the doctor to look at my tooth? But again, like, we're in a foreign country, we don't know how anything works, and so it finally got to the point where someone else on the trip, I don't remember who, but one of the other girls on the trip told somebody that I was having this problem, and so then they came to me and took me into the doctor, and she looked at it and said maybe it was infected, I don't know, and so I ended up being the first person that that the organization had ever had to take to the dentist while on a short-term trip. And so the other guy who was the one of the other guys on the trip who was the leader, him and I and a girl from the organization headed down to Antigua. And it's funny looking back because I have a totally different perspective of the whole thing, but now than I did then. But at the time, it's like, okay, I'm in a foreign country. I have no idea what a scary dentist is going to be like in a third world country, and I I'm gonna have to go see the dentist. Like, I already don't like going to the dentist, but I'm gonna have to go to one in the middle of nowhere, right? And so we go down to
In another
Antigua,
country. Hmm.
yeah, in another country, and I'm sitting there, and everything is pretty much like how a dentist office would be in the States, except for you're sitting in a building that was built like in the 1700s. And so down in the bottom, so it's a two-story situation. I'm sitting down in the bottom in the waiting room, and this thing it must have been, looking back, like pediatric dentistry was like their specialty, because everything was like little dinosaurs and stuff, toys for kids and all this. And here I am, this like big white American guy sitting there waiting to get my tooth looked at. And then they call me back. So I fill out my information. They call me
I don't
back
know. I felt
and
like
we
it was
hit.
appropriate.
Yeah, right. And so then they call me back and we head up this like super narrow, flimsy, like I said, 1700s spiral staircase to the second floor, which they would never have something like this in America. But I was like, are you kidding me? At the time, like I said, different perspective now. But we get up there and they do x-rays, they look at it, the doctor comes back now this is the part that I don't look at differently. The doctor was very rude, just to be honest. Now, it's not characterizing everyone down there, and I have more dentistry stories to tell later on about this, but very rude, and basically was like, you need a root canal, I'll get you in tomorrow and it'll be $300 and we'll get it done. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I came all the way down here. We fundraised for 6 months, a year, whatever. And I end up here the second, third day, and I'm going to have to get a root canal in Guatemala. What'd you do? Hey, what was your mission trip like? What'd you do for all the people in Guatemala? Well, I didn't do much because I got a root canal. That's what I'm thinking. And so I was like, he said he was going to give me antibiotics, and after 24 hours, of taking the antibiotics, come do the thing. And I was like, all right, listen, what if I take the antibiotics because clearly it's infected? The antibiotics is a course of like a week or something like that. I was supposed to take them. What if I just take them? I just get comfortable for the rest of this trip and then go home and do it. And he was like, whatever. And so I took the antibiotics. Here's the other 2 mistakes were made in this. Number one, I was thinking $300. I don't want to spend $300 on a root canal. That was the first mistake, because when I came home, I ended up spending $5,000 on the root canal because I was on the government healthcare system, and it just so happened to be that not until the next calendar year did they cover dental procedures like this. So I was out $5,000 instead of $300. I could have flown back to Guatemala and had that procedure done for cheaper than it ended up costing me. Secondly, this wasn't my first rodeo when it came to root canals. And I figured, no big deal. I'll just pop me some antibiotics and everything will go great. Little did I know that the cheapest way that they administered antibiotics, at least through that doctor in Guatemala, was through a shot in the butt. And so for the next 5 days that we were in Guatemala, every night after we did our little team meeting and kind of debriefing what we did through the day, and I don't know if you remember this, but we were sitting, I vividly remember sitting on top of what they call La Casa Grande. Yeah. We do our team meeting, everyone debriefs, we pray, we do worship, whatever. All right, break. And I say, okay, guys, hold on. I got to go in this room and pull down my pants to get a shot in the butt. And then we all can go. And so just maybe that's a humbling experience.
That's hilarious.
But yeah, 2 mistakes made with that. And then the third would be not brushing my teeth well enough for years leading up to that moment. But that's how the trip started for me, really. Because it was like we got boots on the ground, toothache, then that all happened. But it gave me a unique experience the rest of you didn't get.
That's for sure. I mean, my experience was being assigned to the sports part. And I'm like, out of all the areas, I think sports was my last one that I chose.
Really?
And here I am doing sports. I'm not a sports guy. I watch WWE. That's as far as I go when it comes to sports. Bowling.
Mm-hmm.
Bowling. That's my sport right there. So, but I had a great time, man. I just dove into it, and I talk about Submerge Life. Like, that was my Submerge Life. I didn't care. Even though there is some traumatic experiences when it comes to sports in my past, I just dove into it and I just said, okay, I'm going to do this. It sucks because I'm doing sports, but you know what? I'm in Guatemala and these kids are having an amazing time. Yeah. So I just did it and I made the best time that I could. I remember that. I remember our little house that we lived in, the family. Mm-hmm. Fortunately, we lived there and not inside the other house where James and Eric lived, because they didn't have any meat until the last couple of days. So just so that people know, these houses, they volunteer to have come live with them, and then they get a stipend, right? They get money to cook dinner and pay for. And James and Eric, their family basically cooks soup every night, like a bone broth, maybe. I don't know. We got food, and I'm gonna be honest, I was hungry. Even though we had food, I overcompensated, and I didn't tell anybody. Like, my stomach hurt. I had so much gas built up because I overcompensated that food, and I ate those little tortillas that she made. You remember, like, she would make these tortillas, and so I'm like, oh gosh, I can't ask for a third plate. I'm gonna eat these tortillas. I kept eating them, and it just built up in the gas, and it hurt.
The other thing that you have to remember too, or that we have to bring up, is that where we were in Guatemala is at about 6,500 feet elevation. And so you being in sports, especially, your body is affected. Even if you weren't doing sports, your body is affected in ways that we're not usually accustomed to, especially us. We come from basically sea level. I always remember the altitude of where we live is 357 because I had a teacher who was like, "You'll never forget, it's 357 Magnum," and I was like, "Okay, I have never forgotten that." So to go from living at basically sea level to all of a sudden you get on a plane and then you basically never, like when you get on a plane, this is getting like way into the weeds, but when you're on an airplane, the altitude in the pressure in the plane, like the relative like altitude is about 6,500 feet. And you ever notice if you're on a plane, it's kind of hard to breathe, harder than it is normally. You get off the plane and then that never stops. You're just at that same 6,500 feet feeling that whole time. And so then that also does things to the way that your body metabolizes food, the way that it uses oxygen. I mean, you're drinking way more water than you normally would, and dealing with dehydration and all that. So, and then that affects the gas. And then on top of all of that, as if that wasn't enough, the water is out to get you as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so a
Yeah,
lot of us were probably dealt with issues with the water as well, because the water, just the way as it comes, isn't drinkable. And you can do everything you can to not drink the tap water or whatever, but you don't know how food is prepared. Like, you're not preparing your own food the whole time, and so
right.
you
So
never
you're
know.
always
So
living in fear.
yeah,
Or we could have got
yeah,
electrocuted in that shower.
yes,
Do you remember
there's
the
that
shower?
too.
Because there was a light that was right next to the water thing and exposed wiring.
Mm-hmm. I love it. A lot of people will like complain about that. So just to explain, like the way that a lot of Guatemalans, if they have a hot shower, the way that they do it is what us gringos call the Widowmaker. And basically, what it is it's an electric shower head. And so the you have your pipe coming out of the wall. It goes into the shower head, and then the shower head has a positive and a negative going into wherever the electricity is coming into your home. And by the way, the shower head is not like up against the wall as we're accustomed to, like in the States. The shower head will come out on a copper pipe, on piping that conducts electricity itself as well. And then to where the shower is directly over top of you. And for most Guatemalans, it's really not an issue because the shower is set up for their height. And most of them are a lot shorter than we are as Americans. It just has to do with nutrition. But for Americans, when we go into these homes that have the setup like this, it does become an issue where you're like, hey, it sounds like a joke, but to be serious, when you wash your hair, don't get your hands up too high because there very likely could be exposed wires because that's what heats the water.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I love it. I love all those little things that are different. Some people, they freak out, and that's the story that they're still telling. But that, and then
it was great. It was such a great time.
And you can't flush your toilet paper either.
Oh yeah, you couldn't do that either.
and that's a big adjustment for some people. And that was the first time I'd ever dealt with that. And I think you just get over the embarrassment of it. I think that's the biggest thing. It's getting over like your built-in like autopilot of like throwing your toilet paper in the toilet, and then it's the embarrassment of like, I'm throwing my old toilet paper in here. But I'll never forget. Well, you came through, and I don't even know if you remember this, but you came through and had the best thing that really saved me the rest of the trip, and that was the wet wipe.
Oh,
the wet.
Is that where you were introduced to those?
Yeah. The wet wipe got me through that time on that trip, as far as that goes. Because you got to remember, I had to make sure that I was spick and span for that evening, every evening when I got the shot in the butt, and the wet wipe is what got me there.
Oh, that was great. That was a great time. We had a great setup in that house. I mean, pretty much had our own bathroom. We had our own rooms. We had the little living room so we can huddle because it was you and Cody and then me and Dalt. And then we would huddle at the end of the night, kind of conversate and process through what we experienced that day. I remember the earthquake when we were in the building. I don't know if you were there. You could have been out in the hospital at that point, but the earthquake happened early in the morning. Hiked that volcano. But the family, the couple, the older couple, were you there with them? Did you hear them sing, or did you see? Do you remember that? Like, no.
Refresh my memory. I'm not sure.
It's in the video. If I have a video, I'm gonna post it. Well, I know I have a video. If I want to edit
Mm-hmm.
it, I'm gonna slide it right here. Now I have to. At the end of that
Wow,
video,
that was a great
we
video.
um,
like radiant diamonds bursting inside us. We cannot contain your love will surely come find us like blazing wildfires, singing your name. God of mercy, sweet love of mine, I have surrendered to your design. And may this offering stretch across the sky, and these hallelujahs be multiplied.
Soy feliz. Ahora solo adoro mi Cristo, mi tesoro. Un día con letras de oro mi nombre fue escribió.
Allá en tu libro
Lindo
santo, mi nombre Cristo está.
there is an older couple that we had visited. They basically had nothing, and they lived in cinder block home. Actually, no, I don't think they were a couple. They were a brother and sister, and one was blind and the other one was hard in hearing. But the place was a mess. Like they had one room plus their little kitchen, if you want to call it their room and kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And they sat and they sang for us, and they just had so much joy and happiness, and they didn't have really anything, nothing.
Yeah.
And maybe you can see it in the video. It was very dark in there because there was no electricity, so I don't think I got a good video. The other thing too is I lost a lot of my footage and my photos because my phone broke and I didn't have everything backed up, so I only have a little bit. I was only able to save a little bit, and then what other people had, and a few things were backed up on my GoPro and stuff. So that was one of the most memorable. This city behind us, where I mean, the couple that we went through was like way worse than this that we met, the brother and sister. But this was really bad too. And in this city that we were in, of that picture that is behind us, it was let's see if I can add that. Yeah, that pretty bad. I remember being flooded when it rained. It literally flooded the whole streets. You couldn't go anywhere. You couldn't really go out at night. You had to be in pairs of two or more because of the city, and you couldn't cross a certain barrier or line. It was great. It was so good. So I think if people ever think about going on mission trips, go with the church. Go for a short term one. But this changed because you came back, and then what happened?
Yeah. So basically, here's kind of inside baseball of how this whole thing worked out. Myself and my now wife had kind of been talking. She had, through all these fundraisers that we were doing to try to go on this trip, we had done a lot of things. You remember we did a fundraiser at Chick-fil-A and at the yogurt place, which, I mean, side note, I don't even know if I should bring that up the name of the yogurt place, but I think it's hilarious that, I mean, sorry for them, but it is kind of funny that it's out of business because it was kind of like a Calvinist name, and it's like, was that... Anyway, not to go down that rabbit trail, but my wife was showing up at all these things, and we had kind of been talking, and I started to look at the schedule of what was happening with Guatemala. And she was taking a trip for 2 weeks to the East Coast to go visit her brother. We were going on this trip to Guatemala for 2 weeks, and they overlapped by like 2 days. So it was going to be a month where we weren't going to see each other, and we were just getting to the point where it's like I gotta like poop or get off the pot kind of a thing. Like I need to ask her out, or like this is not going to be anything. And so I was like, hey, we're going to be both gone. You're going to the East Coast. I'm going to be out of the country. Do you want to get coffee in a month? And I'm thinking, no way, this is not going to happen. But she said yes. And so I'm like, wow, I'm on top of the world. Like, we're going to go get coffee. We're going to go on a date and kind of see where this goes. But then a whole month goes by. And when, because she left on her trip, and then 2 weeks into it, we left, went on our trip to Guatemala. When she left for her trip, she didn't even hug me before she left. Like, it was very awkward goodbye, and was like, okay, well, I don't know where this is going. About halfway through our trip in Guatemala, I decided I need to focus on what's going on here. I'm going to turn my phone off. I'm not going to talk to her. I not out of anything bad, but just that I wanted to focus. And I told her, hey, sorry, like I want to, I still want to talk to you, but I'm going to put this on pause for this last week here, and I will like text you when we're coming home or whatever. Just pray for me. I'll be praying for you, sort of a thing. During that whole time, I was journaling and kind of writing to her my thoughts about, you know, what I was going through there, and like also where I kind of saw if we were ever going to have a relationship, where that would go. And I eventually gave that to her once we were back. But the day that we got back, or I think we got back like on a Saturday and then had church the next day, something like that. When I saw her for the first time the day after we got back, it was like a completely different thing. She came up, hugged me, was like, welcome back, yay. And it was like this whole, totally different than when I had left. So I was like, okay, there's still hope here. And so I said, would you want to, are you still like up for getting coffee tomorrow? And surprisingly she was. And so kind of to fast forward through all that, but so we started dating, and then we ended up married a year later. And I should note that when we were getting ready to go on our first trip to Guatemala, or my first trip and our trip that you and I went on together, Tony, when I signed up for the trip, like I said, Guatemala was not on my mind at all. I was just like, whatever, I'll go. I don't see why not. As we started to fundraise and it became more of a real thing, and the funds started to come in, and it was like, wow, like this is really happening. I started to think to myself, like, whoa, like maybe I will be a missionary. Like maybe I will go and live there, and like this will be so awesome. And I'm going to go on this trip, and I'm going to see where I'm going to live, and I'm going to be a missionary. It's going to be so great. I had a great time on that trip in 2016. You know, despite the whole root canal situation and all that. But by the end of the trip, I was not thinking of being a missionary whatsoever. I was like, you know what? I feel like that was a great experience. I loved living in that house with you guys, with Juan and Veronica. That was our host family's name. That was great. And I loved, you know, being able to drive around, see the country and see the people. And I loved everything about it, but I just didn't feel called to be a missionary. And so I kind of left that part thinking, okay, I don't know what all that means. I was in college still. So I was like, I'm going to finish college. I started to date my now wife. We get married a year later. We got married basically exactly a year after Guatemala. You were in my wedding. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah,
I hope you enjoyed the suit. And
I did. I had bad hair, but yeah, I did. I enjoyed the suit. That's right. Your dad went ahead and just bought us all suits.
Yeah.
I look at the pictures and I'm like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking with that hair? You did not.
I don't think that. Yeah, I don't think that at all.
I was like, oh God, you should have pushed that back. But yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, sidetrack.
No, that's all right. That's all right. And so then about a month before we got married, we had gone through in the months leading up, we had gone through a premarital counseling thing through our church. And we were nearing the end of the premarital counseling stuff, and we're going through a little book that they had, and one of the things said like, hey, you're about to enter like the final month before you get married. Why don't you and your fiance go do something together just to get rid of the stress of the wedding planning and all of that? So go take a trip, go see a movie, whatever, that kind of a thing. And so we decided to go on this little hike up to a place called Weaver Lake in the Sierra Mountains here in Central California. Now, I grew up here. I never heard of Weaver Lake. Maybe you have. Some people have. Some people haven't. I had never heard of it. And it's the kind of thing where it's beautiful, but you have to kind of go on off the beaten path to get to where the trail even starts, sort of a thing, and driving. And then you kind of do this trail a couple miles up to this little secluded lake or large pond, really. As we're driving up this hill, and we're talking roads that are like 1-lane road, the left side is the hill and the right side is the cliff, sort of a deal. There's this guy in this Subaru just like tailgating me, and we're in the middle of nowhere. This guy is just tailgating me, won't get off my tail. And I finally get to a point where I'm able to let him squeeze past, and he goes and, he flies off, and we end up back at the trailhead eventually, or the parking area. And we get there, he's kind of getting out of his car and, taking care of his dog and all this. And it's actually, I thought it was like some punk kid. It ended up being this older guy, like in his 60s, maybe 70s, sort of a thing. And he is looking at my car, and he saw that I had a sticker from our church on the back of our car. And he's like, "Oh, you go there?" And I was like, "Yeah." I think at that point, now I wasn't working there yet, but I was like, we're just kind of small talking about that. And Brianna, my wife, asks him, "So like, what do you do?" And he's like, "Oh, well, I work for a mission organization here locally." "Oh, really? Which one?" Students International. And I'm like, "What? No way. I literally just went to Guatemala with them last year." And he's like, "Oh, cool. And so we kind of tell him about how we're about to get married next month and all that. And he says, "You know what you should do? Once you guys get married, you guys should go on a trip together." And so we're like, "Oh, okay. Yeah, that would be cool." And before he takes off, she asks him, "So what do you do?" And he's like, "Well, I like to think that I just help people, but they call me the CEO." So for us, we're like mind blown that here in the middle of nowhere. I mean, to me, to be honest, like this place where we went to this lake is more in the middle of nowhere than the places we were in Guatemala. Like it's really, really off the beaten path. It was like us, him, and maybe one other person we saw the whole time there. And here we are put in front of the CEO of the organization that I had gone to Guatemala with. And we were kind of mind blown about that. So we get married and we kind of go through all that. And once literally the honeymoon phase was over, we start thinking about this Guatemala thing. And so we decide to go on another short-term trip together. And you can cut me off whenever you want if I'm just blabbering.
Yeah, no. You're good. You're good. I did send you a message though, so I'm not going to tell people what it was.
Okay. So we decide to go on a short-term trip together. And now on this trip, I told you what I thought on the first trip. The first trip, I said, "I'm going to be a missionary. This is going to be awesome." At the end of it, I was like, I don't feel like that at all. At the lead into the second trip, I say, "Hey, on that first trip, I thought all that stuff. I'm not going to think that at all. I'm not going to this trip to be a missionary. I just want to go there, see the people that I met, do that again, and then let my wife see the things that I experienced. That's it." And from the first time, the first day that we got there, we both felt like God was calling us to live and work in Guatemala. And so kind of through a long application process and all of that, we got accepted to be full-time missionaries. So this was in 2018, and then we started to see just, it was like a lot of hurry up and wait. Like we got accepted. Yeah, this sounds great, but we didn't have the money. And during that time, I lost my job at the church. That church was supposed to fund us mainly for going to Guatemala, and they didn't. And what ended up happening is, through a random encounter at Starbucks with a guy that I used to work with at a school who's a Christian, he and his wife ended up becoming basically our church sponsor for all of Guatemala. They ended up just out of the blue, and I just happened to run into them at Starbucks. I hadn't seen them for a couple of years, ran into them, kind of told them what we were doing, and that started a relationship to where they wanted to support us. And I'm thinking like, oh yeah, maybe $50-$100 a month. They ended up supporting us for an amount that was what churches usually support people for a month, and they pretty much funded the whole thing and ended up getting us over the finish line at the end when to get to Guatemala. And so just that's one story of many like that, of people who came through, and it was just incredible to see how God worked that out, because that was probably our biggest hurdle, in our minds at least, leading up to going and living in Guatemala, is how are we going to make this happen financially? And it really came down, it really was like God took care of it.
When you look in retrospect, it's like, okay, that was a silly question, because you were in the middle of a lake, in the middle of nowhere, meeting the CEO of this organization that you just went on a trip with, that's saying, hey, let's go. And so it's like the coincidences are a little bit more than just a coincidence. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
And then you get funded. You meet you see this guy that you used to know, and it's like, okay.
Yeah.
I see what you're doing here. It's not the plan that we as people have picked, but it was the plan.
And the other thing is that this all happened in the middle of COVID. Like, this was right in the middle of all the COVID stuff going on. Like, I had lost my job at the church, started working at a school. Of course, as just when things start going great at the school, COVID shuts everything down, and I'm out of a job. And so the way that it worked out was like, we have to get funded and move to Guatemala, or else what are we going to do? we don't have anything else lined up, you know? And the way that it worked out is we were a couple $100 short a month. And that guy that I was telling you about, like kind of like the last second, was like, hey, I saw your last update, and just want to let you know we're gonna up our monthly so that you guys can make it and go.
Dang.
And I really feel like in the fundraising process, I really feel like I did nothing. And it wasn't easy. It wasn't like the funds just all came in at once. It was like a year or two like process, but it was like everything we tried didn't work. And then God just provided in his timing.
Yeah. That's still a lesson that I'm learning
when it needed to happen,
and in life. Right. That was my biggest concern, was the fundraising. But every single trip that I went on, from Israel to Guatemala to Thailand and Cambodia, it all got funded. I didn't have to spend. I not like I had money myself, but it all got funded, and I didn't have to worry about it. And
yeah,
and I see the sign that's behind me, the toy drive.
Mm-hmm.
Every year, and every year I go through that too, where it's like, man, I didn't do enough, or I need to do all this stuff, but I wasn't able to. This past year I was in a job transition, and the year before that, I don't know what it was, but these things just happened, and all these toys came in without me really putting forth all of the effort that I wanted to. But I felt like I needed to at least do this toy drive, and it was successful every single time. Yeah. Even though I was worried, my human side was worried. The anxiety of not getting these toys and having them for these kids, and then end up having way more than I needed when I did every single toy drive that I've done. But this last one was insane. I mean, having the toy store that I did with Martin Park, and then going around inside a car with a bunch of toys. I mean, the cart was packed to the top. The toy store was filled it but it's that thing where it's like, okay, we feel like God wants us to do something, we go do it, we feel like, okay, well, I got to do all this stuff, but in reality, like, God's going to make it happen. You just got to do your part, believe, and go do it,
Mm-hmm.
and attempt to do it. He's going to provide the logo. He provided the logo. All right, it was a
Yeah.
friend of mine that did the logo, um, and it's just, yeah, seeing that and then hearing your story, how, yeah, we feel like we didn't do enough, but it all happens. It all comes out. So, what's that dude's name again? Because I might go on a mission trip soon.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so you guys get to Guatemala. You guys start this journey,
Yeah.
completely different from the first time. I'm sure you didn't have a root canal that you needed to do.
Right.
What did you guys do when you were there? I mean, I saw some videos. We didn't talk too much, but what did you guys do? Like, what was the purpose?
So what we were doing when we had moved there and lived there is we were in charge of a child sponsorship program. So in Guatemala, school is not free. Even the public school, kids have to pay for, families have to pay for. And so these kids were sponsored by people from the U.S. and a few other countries as well to be able to go to school. And we managed that whole thing. So my job was a lot of dealing with payments and kind of building relationships with school principals and administrators and that kind of stuff, and helping out with Bible studies at the same time. And then, so I took on a lot of like the administrative part of it, which I loved. I loved that I was able to like drive around and see more of the country and interact with more people and whatnot. And Brianna was in charge of basically like the girls ministry part of that. So junior high school age girls, doing Bible studies, events, and that kind of stuff with them. Because kind of the whole crux of the whole thing is like, yeah, it's great to provide an education, but the whole way that the whole system worked was that as being part of the sponsorship program meant that you had to come to our Bible studies and youth groups and that kind of stuff, which is like, you're kind of coercing people into it. But that's the whole point, is to share the love of Jesus and discipleship was kind of the whole point. And so that's what we were doing there. And we ended up in that role basically because in the whole theme of Submerged, we said when we went on our short-term trip and we felt called to Guatemala, we were like, we feel called here, but we have no idea what we want to do. And it all kind of, we ended up in those roles that we were in because that's just what the organization said there was a need of. And that in itself is one thing that I wish if I could go back that I would change, because I didn't realize until after being there for probably 6 months that that's not the way that things usually happen, at least in this organization. What I found out is that most people say, hey, I feel called to Guatemala or whatever country, and here's this thing that I'm good at. I'm going to create a ministry site and do that. I didn't realize that that's how it was. And we didn't, like I said, didn't find that out until much later, to where when it was too late. And we were just like, hey, we're all in, Submerge, baby. Like, we're going all in. Wherever you guys need us, we'll go. And for Brianna, that was pretty much where she needed to be. She did great with those girls and everything. But for me, that was not where I should have been. And if I could do anything differently, I would have taken it a little bit more slowly. Like, yes, it was great that we got funded as quickly as we did, but I wish that we would have taken a step back and that we would have known that's how things usually go, is to kind of create your own ministry site. Because had that happened, the whole of what happened the rest of our time in Guatemala would have been completely different. We got thrown into a ministry where we were told that the guy who was leading it was going to leave. He was supposed to be returning to the States, and the idea was that we would come in, learn from him, and then he would leave. Well, when we got there and we start learning from him, we realized very quickly that like our personalities do not mesh. And one of the things that they will tell you in like in missionary training, anywhere you go, is like most missionaries come back from the field because of like interpersonal things, not because of like stuff from the mission field itself. At first, it was like, okay, like he's gonna leave anyway, so we'll just put up with it. But then very quickly it turned to, yeah, he can't find a job in the States, so you guys will kind of just work under him. And that's where things started to turn sour, because we just had, now he was great at what he did. He was great at his job. He was made for that position. But we had very different ideas of how things should go. And things kind of cascaded. Decisions were made by the leadership that they were doing their best to fix a problem, but it wasn't the best decision for everyone involved. And what ended up happening is the whole thing kind of blew up. He got moved into a different position he shouldn't have been in. I got thrown into a position that I shouldn't have been in. And it became very strange. And I see that we're coming up on a deadline. So I don't know if you want me to just wrap it up or
No, we got a couple
you tell
more
me.
minutes. We'll go another 5 minutes.
Okay. So basically, what we were all told in the missionary training, absolutely 100% true. Interpersonal things between the other American staff were like 99% of the problems. Now there are some things that culturally were difficult, but but we were well prepared for, I believe, through the training and stuff that we did. We spent a month in North Carolina at a training center before we left, kind of learning all this stuff. But like I said, had we kind of slowed down and been less eager to just get started working, I think we would still be in Guatemala today. Because we didn't sign up to just go for a few years. We signed up with the intention of like, this is going to be our life, and this is where we want to live and serve. And I think that at least my eagerness to get started, because when we arrived, we went to language school. We got there in September of 2020. Went to language school. We went really quickly learning Spanish, and then, like I said, the plan was that this guy was going to leave, so they wanted us to start working like immediately. So we all went home for Christmas. Then we came back in January, and we were like, all right, yeah, throw us in. But I think that if we had just said, you know what, let's just stay in language school a few more months and get better at the language and learn the culture a little bit better, get a little bit more settled, it would have given, first off, it would have given me the time to end up having that conversation with the director where he told me that most people start their own ministry project. If I had heard that before getting into the job, I could have taken the whole year to develop what my ministry site was going to be. There's no rush, you know. In fact, most people will go to their country, and this is like across the board with missionaries. In most of the world, when missionaries go to whatever country that they're going to go to, they don't get working for at least 2 years, sometimes 5, sometimes 7 years. They spend just learning the culture and the language before they actually start to get to work. And we did it in a matter of months. And so that was like the first mistake, I think. And then secondly, like I said, not taking the time to evaluate and say, what are my strengths? Because if I could do it again, I would have said, you know what? I want to start a media site. There was no media site anymore at the time. I want to do media. I want to get some cameras. I want to get some, maybe even podcasting equipment, and start teaching kids how to podcast and video edit and that kind of stuff, and do discipleship classes through that.
Right.
But when you're in the midst of it, everything is so new and so exciting, and so just
It's
you want to get
go.
Exactly. And I mean, that's something that, not that I'm qualified to give anybody advice, but if somebody's out there and thinking of becoming, a full-time missionary overseas, it's okay to go slow. It's okay to slow down. It's okay if your fundraising takes years. We knew people who fundraised just to get to Guatemala for 5 years. It took them 5 years to get fully fundraised, and then they spent about 6 years, I think it was, in the field. But that it's okay to go slow with things, and that's something that I'm learning myself. Like I'm sitting here giving this advice, but I'm learning myself is it's all right
You're
that
still
things aren't
learning it.
happening right now. Yeah.
What is one of the um I don't know, what was one of the success stories that you had out there? Because I'm sure, I mean, there is a lot of you know, headbutting on that, but then also like your
Hmm.
car always breaking down. I remember always seeing
Yeah.
a video
Hmm.
of that little bug breaking down. But
Yeah.
in the midst of all of that, there is also some beauty, there's also some success, there is also some life. What is
Yeah.
one of those stories? Could you share one of those?
Yeah. I mean, I think that one of the greatest things was what Brianna was doing there, and just she really started this girls youth group basically from the ground up. It had been a lot more, I would say, elementary in the fact that it was like it was
Hmm.
more simple, and not in a bad way, but
Hmm.
it was just imagine you have like junior high, high school girls, and things were just a little too juvenile for them. She created this ministry that really looked like a solid, like small group or life group sort of a thing with girls. And the thing that always made, like, I felt that my role in Guatemala was to do the background work that allowed that to happen. So like if I had to be the one to go
Oh,
pay the bills and to get to make the background of the program going that allowed her to be able to do this ministry with those girls, like that's what I saw really as my role. And so I mean
yeah.
I remember countless stories of girls telling, she would come and tell me that these girls would say, Miss Brianna, like I've never heard somebody t- teach the Bible that way. Like I've heard the gospel a million times, but I've never, like it's never clicked with me like that before. Or I've heard this
Mm.
story of Esther or Ruth or whatever, and I've never like applied that to me before. And like, what is God saying about my life? Right. You know what I mean? Like, and stuff like that to me was like the biggest success. And then the other thing that no matter what happens, whether someday we go back to Guatemala or not, I'm thankful for the opportunity to have learned Spanish. Like it has opened up a whole other world of people that I can communicate with now.
Hmm.
In the roles that I'm in right now, in schools and stuff, like being able to have street cred with kids who think that they can talk behind my back at first has been great.
They're like, oh
Um,
no, no, no.
yeah, yeah, and then also just friends that we worked with, because there was a lot of interpersonal stuff that was difficult, but also a lot of friends that we made who they will be our friends forever. Americans, Guatemalans, and that's been great.
Right.
To put a kind of like a bow on it is I'm still processing what was the point of all that, because it ended
Mm.
very it ended it's like when you watch a TV show and they cancel it without ever having a finale. That's how Guatemala felt to us. And so I'm still processing what was the point of all that? Like, is it incomplete? Like, should we revisit it? Should we go back to Guatemala? Should we
Yeah.
just give it up and say that was a good experience? Like, we still to this day don't have an answer for that. So that's kind of where we're at with that.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you your one final question, and I'm sure that well, I know you've already pretty much answered it, but let's see if I'm going to ask it anyway. I think I know what the answer is going to be, but let's wrap it up and maybe like a sentence or two. Um, so you've got a person that went out to a mission trip, and now they are gun ho, they are ready to jump in. into a long-term mission, what do you tell that child, that young adult, um, that couple? What kind of advice do you give them now that they're ready, or they feel like they are ready to jump into this long-term mission trip because they were so excited in that short-term 2 week trip?
Yeah. I would say explore it. Explore it. Don't jump in immediately. Be all in your mind. Like if this is what you feel called to do, be all in, but take time to talk to missionaries. And maybe not just from the wherever you went on your short-term trip. Look up on YouTube. There's YouTube videos of missionaries sharing their experience. Learn, like be a learner about where you're going to go, what you're going to be doing, and be okay with the process taking a while. And also don't listen to people who have never done it. We got a lot of advice from people who have never done it about why we shouldn't go, and every one of those people were wrong. Don't listen to people who don't have experience in it, because just the cold honest truth is, unless you've done it, you have no idea that, what you're in for, good and bad. Like there's good and bad things, but seek advice from people who have done it, and let it go slow. Let it be a slow process if that's what God wants.
Great. All right, Aaron. Well, thank you so much. I think we could have gone a couple more hours on that, but we got to wrap it up. Thank you again for coming on in, and for everyone out there watching, go to submergelife.com, listen to all the episodes, look in the description. I'm sure I'm going to have a link to Aaron's podcast or whatever he's doing, right? Because you're working on some stuff. I'll put something in the description. All right. And y'all have a good one. See you next time.
This episode is brought to you by Merge Marketing. For all of your needs on print, design, web page design, and security, go to mergemarketinginc.com.